I saw him and I put my hand on his shoulder because he was walking by me just to say, Tucker. And he had the show at Fox at the time. And I was swarmed by people,
Hmm.
which appeared to be like off duty cops, very beefy guys,
Yeah.
grabbed me. And that's when I realized, oh, you're not the guy
Yeah.
that I knew then who, could walk down the street and maybe people would say hi to you. Oh, it's Tucker Carlson. One of the things that you noticed about Carlson is that he is in some ways an elitist. He
Yeah.
doesn't want to be around the crackpots. He doesn't want to be around these dummies who are making these sort of knuckle dragging ideological arguments. He thinks of himself as higher minded than that. And he has ended up being the absolute avatar of that on the right. I mean, he did an episode fairly recently about chemtrails.
Yeah.
I mean, this is ridiculous. So you point out in the piece that he's with Matt Labash, and he is, hosting something for Ron Paul, which again shows that he's kind of drifting towards the Buchananite, sort of populist, libertarianish. And Labash informs him that when he was out of earshot, Jesse Ventura got on stage and started talking about 9/11 being an inside job. Not only as the MC of that night, they didn't go up and denounce it. He left and said, I
Yeah.
can't be around this nonsense. And then he just produced a multi-part documentary for his own network about how 9/11 was very mysterious. I won't say it
Yeah.
was an inside job. I haven't watched it, so I don't want to mischaracterize it. But that becoming the thing that you hated so much is a little different, right, than traveling in some sort of ideological glide path out of conservatism into sort of super conservatism. Like being,
Yeah. Yeah. No,
it's a
that's a good
weird
call.
thing.
Yeah, it's you're right. And the yeah, you can't explain it just through the normal kind of, ideological trajectory that plenty of people have followed over the years. I mean, there is like sort of an interesting, I mean, there's something about, I mean, the temptation to kind of really go down the rabbit hole with like racism and anti-Semitism, on the right. I mean, pretty, smart, prominent conservative writers that have this is not new necessarily, right? Like I'm thinking Joe Sobran is kind of the
Yeah.
the most
Yeah.
prominent example.
Who you quote Tucker as saying he's in a Denny's,
Yeah.
in his slippers or something, making
Yeah,
fun
he's
of
the
him.
great cautionary tale, right? When
Yeah.
Tucker's a young man and he's sort of making fun of him because this guy has been, sort of like discredited himself and polite society as exiled.
Tell people who Joe Sobran is.
I mean, Joe Silverman was William F. Buckley's protege at the National Review, really like excellent conservative writer. And starting in, I don't know, like early 80s, he starts to get really, really critical of Israel. And it just leads him in a pretty bad direction when it comes to anti-Semitism and racism, and just becomes kind of a crackpot. And Buckley fires him from the National Review, and he starts his own newsletter, and it just gets even worse and worse.
Yeah.
And he dies in kind of disgrace and exile, and no one takes him seriously anymore. I mean, Tucker, I think you could say, is like followed a similar path, but like the biggest difference is that Tucker hasn't been exiled
Yeah.
because there really isn't anyone left to exile him. There are no institutions really left that can censor Tucker or put up guardrails that would try to keep him in place. And I think that's what makes him, to me at least, like that's what made him an interesting person to write about, because he's the crazier he's gotten, sort of the more central he's become. And that, like, I think says something about this current moment, both in politics and in media, and says something a lot bigger than just Tucker himself.
Yeah. I mean, you talked about people wanting to put him on the couch. I'm sort of one of those people in the sense that, you always notice that conspiracy theorists never believe just one, right?
Yeah.
They never say 9/11 was an inside job. Was the moon landing fake? Like, what are you talking about? That's insane. They're like, yeah, well, maybe it was. I mean, in Tucker's sense, he's gone to, as I said, chemtrails, JFK, of course. What other ones? I mean, World War II. I
Yeah.
mean,
Well, yeah.
having this crank,
The
Daryl
pyramids,
Cooper.
right? I
Yeah, the
mean,
pyramids. I mean, this is the latest one. It's like, it's
yeah.
all of them. And you presume that somebody who's that smart, how can they get pulled down by these people who are making easily debunkable arguments that have nothing behind them? And like one question, as I said, about, distance reading, this idea that if that was actually true and there are people that have that capabilities, I mean, the number of casinos that would shut down. Right?
Yeah.
Tucker was a guy in the past who would ask those questions. He didn't lose that power to ask people questions like that. He's still a very smart guy. Something else must be guiding this. He enjoys the, just, poking his finger at people and them getting very excited
Yeah.
and angry. It's like if you ignored the guy, I feel like he'd disappear. But the next thing he does is he's like, I'm in my bed being attacked by demons,
Yeah. Yeah.
in a bed with 8 dogs or something, which has always made me think it was probably the dogs. but,
That's
but,
that's
you know,
I had not thought about that. That's
yeah,
probably the simplest that's the
you
simplest
woke up,
answer.
Jason, with
Yeah.
scratches on your
I
back
know.
and eight
Yeah.
dogs in the bed. You'd probably be like, these damn dogs. You wouldn't say, the devil has visited me at night. I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah.
You would, but yeah, I don't know. I think there is something odd about it that I don't think people lose the ability to think critically
Hmm.
in any amount of critical thinking in on almost all of these stories. I know he's trying to backfill this idea of the deep state. So everything
Yeah.
is the deep state, therefore 9/11 is an inside job. They're lying to us about the Kennedy assassination. They're lying to us about everything. But I mean, I don't know. How do you explain it? I know that's the hard,
Yeah. I
everybody
mean,
wants to
well,
know.
yeah. I mean, I guess, the giveaway is I don't, I suppose, in the end. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't figure out, what exactly causes it.
But what
You know,
did you
and
talk to people, like people who were friends? A lot of people. I mean, you did a lot of reporting for this book. Did anybody have a compelling theory that you said, that sounds about right to me?
Well, yeah. I mean, there was, a festering resentment that was really planted with the Stewart episode. A sense that the people who were his friends and kind of the media and political elite circles like didn't come to his aid at that point, or they took Stewart's side, or they weren't supportive in a way he would have liked. And so I think that made him a little resentful towards them. Then when his own career, kind of went through a pretty rough patch, I think, that resentment increased, and kind of he had a sense that, he wasn't, his talents were not being sufficiently appreciated by cable news chiefs or whoever else. So I do think it's a bit like JD Vance. I mean, there is like a real resentment there towards the they that he's always talking about, whether it's, the deep states or elites or the swamp or whomever. Like there is a genuine, I think, resentment there. And, and it goes even back, the way he talked. I mean, it's so funny how like, on his show, he would spend so much time like bashing Harvard and Yale as these places that only admit the sons and or the children of Democratic politicians. Like
Mhm.
clearly, like there's a bit of resentment there on his part that he didn't go to those schools. And I think that has made his turn towards this populist, like borderline paranoiac view of what elites are doing. I think there's like a real like feeling there on his part. So I think that's part of it. I also think, he's completely like he's no longer tethered to kind of the real world. I mean, he used to live in Washington, D.C. He was even as a member of the conservative media, he actually lived in the city. Like he didn't live in McLean. He loved D.C. He loved being around, liberals. I mean, and he was very much a part of kind of the social ecosystem of Washington. He was, I think I say in the book, like he was the invited skunk to the garden party. He was the guy you would have over at your dinner party to say something kind of outrageous, and everybody would sort of be shocked, but they would also laugh. And that was his role. And then he had to leave DC about halfway through the first Trump presidency just because it became too unpleasant a place for him. I mean, Trump coming into the White House made it impossible for him to go to those dinner parties and say those things. And people didn't laugh anymore. People were like, "Oh, it became a way more serious." And he couldn't navigate the city the way he once did. He couldn't eat at the Palm anymore. And I mean, these are not exactly tragedies, but in his life, it was a big deal. He couldn't go to the Palm anymore. He had to go to the Prime Rib. And he couldn't go to the dog park without getting accosted. And then a serious thing happened. Some protesters, some Antifa protesters, or I think they said they were Antifa, whatever. They were pretty, far left protesters, like showed up outside of his house one night and, started yelling through bullhorn saying, "We know where you live." And he wasn't home. His wife was home. And I think that was, that was scary. And the way he tells that story now, he talks about how people, in sort of mainstream media like supported that. And that's actually not true. Like at the time, I think everyone was
Yeah.
Was horrified, except for people like on the far, 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 far fringe, like people he was fighting with on his TV show and on, on social media or whatever, like all said this is too far. But it led him to leave Washington D.C. and he now, he's had a summer home in Maine for, in his family for years, and he used to spend 2 or 3 months up there. Now he spends 6 months of the year there, and is on an island in a pond, and then he spends the other 6 months of his year in Florida on another island. And his world is just, it's, he traded in like Bill Crystal and David Brooks for, Don Jr. and Theo Vaughn, and that's sort of like, it's just completely, his world is just very small. And I
At
think
least Theo Von's funny. I'll
well,
say
sometimes,
that.
right?
Sometimes. Yeah. When he's not talking about politics, it can be funny.
Don
Um,
Jr. can be funny too, I mean, just in his defense.
yeah.
But
I met him. I interviewed him one time and he was
not funny.
not happy to talk to me. But I'll tell you a story that is, speaks to that is that I was coming back from DC on a train to New York City, and I got out of the train in at 34th Street, and my producer was in a different car and came up to me. We all met, and we had all our gear, and said, "Hey, I saw Tucker Carlson and was in the car with me." Blah blah blah. And I said, "Oh, I'll hang out here. Everyone's coming up the escalator. Maybe I'll see him. I know him a little bit." And I did have a lunch with him one time when he tried to hire me for the Daily Caller. But what he thought about the Spectator back in the day, I kind of thought about the Daily Caller, and I said, "Nah." But I don't think he ever offered me a job. But he comes up, and I saw him, and I put my hand on his shoulder because he was walking by me, just to say Tucker. And he had the show at Fox at the time, and I was swarmed by people,
Hmm.
which appeared to be like off-duty cops, very beefy guys. He
Yeah.
grabbed me and he turned around and and then he turned and I said, "Oh, hey," and said, "Stop, stop, stop. Everything's fine." And that's when I realized, oh, you're not the guy
Yeah.
that I knew then who, could walk down the street and maybe people would say hi to you. Oh, it's Tucker Carlson or something. But there was a threat
Yeah.
just by being Tucker Carlson that, and Glenn Beck talked about this when he moved from New York to, I think, Texas,
Oh yeah.
said that
Yeah.
someone was yelling at him in the park, and it gets pretty ugly and uncomfortable. There was a video of some guy confronting him, I think, when he was fly fishing that
Oh
did
yeah,
the
in
rounds.
Montana.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
Montana. So yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it's like he invites it on himself in so many ways by being as outrageous as he is these days. I don't
Yeah,
mean
actually,
he,
it was funny because that was I just started writing the book then, and or just working on it, and and I had gone to Tucker to see if he would talk to me, and and he was like, I'd love to talk to you, I'm just not sure about Fox, and and then we were sort of like texting back and forth, and like right before he took that trip, we were texting, and he said something like, I'm looking forward to going to Montana. He was going to be like with one of his kids. We're just going to do like fly fishing for a week, and I'm not going to see any other human beings. And then like a couple days later, I
yeah,
saw that video. I was like,
yeah,
man, like he literally was like trying to go, away from the world, and it followed him to this like fly shop in Montana. I mean,
yeah.
that's how bad it had gotten.
Yeah, and I want to be clear when I say he kind of brings that upon himself. I don't mean any of the crazy stuff, the people coming to his house or any, violence visited upon somebody. Just when you're that controversial, people are going to kind of shout you down.